So I'm often asked, what is it like to be an automotive user experience designer? And technology is awesome. I can't wait till the cars drive me. There we go. If you've ever had that stress dream, and I know I have, where you're back in high school and you show up for the big test only to realize that you studied for the wrong subject. That maybe you thought that this was going to be algebra, but it turns out it was like 18th century European lit. Like you have no idea, all right? That's what it's like being an automotive infotainment designer. See, with most tests, you kind of know how to pass. You know what's required. You know how to do well, but not with user experience. See, the automotive industry is great at passing tests, right? We love to set goals. We love to create metrics, and we work tirelessly until those metrics are created. But safety is a great example. Let's talk about safety here for a second. You know, our government rates the safety of vehicles with a 5-point system, 5 stars, right? 5 stars representing the highest level of survivability. 99% of new cars, 2016 models, get either a 4 or 5-star rating. I mean, that's amazing, right? In fact, if your product isn't 5 stars, you probably should be a little bit embarrassed. Now, if this were a high school test, you'd think this must be some blow-off test, right? Like, shop class or home ec or horticulture 101, but it's not. These are very serious tests. And they keep making them harder every year. When everybody passes, they find new things to throw at them. But the key is they know what the test is going to be ahead of time. They have time to figure it out and pass it, and they do. All right? They give away the answers. And I think if any of you have spent any time with automotive safety engineers, you realize that these are really serious people. These are the guys in high school that went up to the teacher on the first day and wanted to know exactly what it took to ensure that they get an A. All right? User experience is not for these people. Not at all. How do you know if it's good? Who does it well? Who does it best? How do you get an A? Good luck with that. All right. So these guys, Consumer Reports, have been a little vague. During the development of most systems that are that are on display here, they really just had a rating system for controls and displays, a line item amongst a whole bunch of other things. That was one of these 5 dots, right? Not exactly comprehensive, not exactly impartial, right? I mean, they were very skeptical about having a screen in the car at all, kind of advised against it, points off for having it. And then when Ford and Cadillac got rid of the volume knob, black dot, instant black dot. Unless you're Tesla, in which case, awesome job, best car ever. So in June of this year, they actually finally released a very comprehensive, unbiased survey of infotainment satisfaction from the consumers themselves, right? It was great. The results are very interesting and a little surprising if you think about how much effort and testing goes into creating one of these systems. I mean, if you apply the US standard grading scale, like so, you'll see that we have a very, very difficult subject here. This is not shop class, right? The top student got a C-, right? All but 3 received failing grades. I mean, given the corporate target setters, let's say, obsession with Consumer Reports, I'm sure that if any of you here are from an OEM, you've probably been tasked with getting your score up, right? We want to be in the top quartile, or our brand should be an 80 or above, or we want to be an infotainment leader, or, my little Susie should have gotten an A. No doubt you're getting that pressure. J.D. Power's initial quality has historically measured things gone wrong. I was very pleased to see earlier today that J.D. Powers is now looking forward and anticipating a lot of these sort of things. But at the time when these vehicles were designed, it really was just looking at problems, things gone wrong. Which is not always helpful, because the user experience is a lot more than just the elimination of problems, right? And big car companies hate criticism. I mean, you think they are these monstrous megaliths that, that are insulated from all this. Nope, every car is somebody's baby, all right? And anytime one of these systems is launched, there is always a ton of constructive criticism from dealers, consumers, family members, anybody. And it's tough. And it tends to move the discussion on the next gen system away from how can we surprise and delight and amaze to what do we have to do to avoid criticism, right? And that's a shame, because this stuff should be cool, all right? It should be desirable, right? It's an emotional reason to buy the car. In fact, I'm going to point something out that every designer in the room here instinctively knows, but sometimes gets lost on our product development partners. Nobody needs a new car, right? Our job is to make them want a new car, right? The cars we're doing now, they last over 20 years. But people only hold on to them for maybe 5 or 6, unless they're leasing, and then maybe half of that, right? We're in the business of making a well-educated, logical person who has money trade in a perfectly good car for something else, right? And user experience is a big part of that. So there's no study guide for this process. There's no good roadmap. Now, as a designer, we're very used to uncertainty. In fact, we kind of like it. We often find ourselves in meetings with our product development colleagues where they will have reams of data that say we absolutely need to do this exactly this way. And we find ourselves saying, well, okay, but we should do it this way because it'll look really, really good. But we have to remember we are in the entertainment business, right? That's the tainment part of infotainment. That is why I am very thrilled that we're putting together this conference like this, that Drew and Tom and the team put this together, and frankly had the courage to be able to do some very extensive user testing on a lot of vehicles. I mean, I think most people's heads would spin. And to be honest, most user experience reviews are pretty thin. So I think this is great. This is a great event, and I think that what they've been able to do here with a far more comprehensive review of these vehicles is a new precedent. So I'm going to do my best to capture what I feel maybe are the best elements, and I don't think that, like I said, there's going to be any surprises here as much as just adding some color and context to why it's important. Now, to that point, to add some context to things, there was no degree in automotive user experience back when I graduated from College for Creative Studies. I was a car designer, right? Some of my old sketches from back when we used to draw cars on paper, except for the one in the corner. That's with the Chinese billionaire sitting in the back seat of his Buick on the phone. That was my first actual digital sketch. But I digress. Cars are really nice now, I gotta say. That if you spend some time, I mean, these are family cars, all right? This is what concept cars looked like a few years ago, right? They've got hidden flush bumpers. There's ambient lighting in the lamps. These are sedans, but they have the profile of coupes. And the differences in build tolerance and material choices and panel gaps between brands, it's so narrow that most people really can't tell the difference. But a bad UI, everyone can spot from a mile away, right? Your 11-year-old and your mother, and everyone in between, right? So as a trained industrial designer who happens to have a passion for this stuff, I've noticed that in UI development there are some differences, and it doesn't necessarily enjoy the same process that maybe the rest of the car design gets. See, when we start a program, we do a lot of ideas, right? This isn't exactly how it looks, but this is how it feels, right? They're all your babies. You love them, This is what it actually looks like. Lots of sketches, lots of scale models, full-size models. A huge amount of effort goes into exploration. And it's highly competitive, all right? Some brands have satellite or advanced studios, maybe in another part of the world. They're competing. They'll use consultant studios to do alternative themes to kind of compete with whatever's happening back at the mothership. This is a very healthy practice, right? If your mainstream idea goes unchallenged, under development, it's going to have a rough time when it hits the market and really gets challenged, okay? So really only by exploring as many ideas as possible can you be sure that your design is going to be best, right? And so if you look at your own programs going on right now, is there kind of a mainstream plan that goes unchallenged and you're really just working it? You know, are there multiple user experience proposals going on? Right? Are the advanced studios making user experience production proposals? Usually not. All right. So today I'm going to illustrate some of these points and talk about the sort of elements that when we work on a project, what we try to put into it. And hopefully it'll be entertaining as well. So I'm going to start off back in 2003. Bentley revealed the Continental GT Coupe at the Geneva Auto Show. This car was stunning. All right, this is the car that designers drew on like napkins when they were on the phone and no one was watching, right? And I was lucky enough to be there at the show. And after the press and everybody kind of moved on to the next conference, I went up on stage and introduced myself to their interior designer, Robin Page. I think he spoke at the last awards conference earlier this year. Really nice guy, fantastic host. Walked me through the GT's interior in great detail. 6 species of wood, those really cool push-pull knobs for closing off the air vents, leather that was so soft it made you blush. There's one thing that he said to me that really stuck, and that was, you know, well, we don't want the customer to ever touch plastic in a Bentley. I mean, I looked at him like he was speaking another language, right? I mean, back then at GM, everything was plastic. There was no place you could touch that wasn't. Even the leather had so much plastic on it, you really couldn't feel that it was leather. Now, of course, not to be annoying or anything, but to his great dismay, I then pointed out all the little touch points that were still plastic in his new car, and that Bentley owners had to suffer through in their ownership experience. Every single one of them was an electronic control. In fact, that was the only plastic. And he kind of shrugged and said, yeah, that's kind of, we really didn't have any choices there. It seems technology did not get the Bentley memo. Fast forward to the present. Now phones and laptops are made out of billet milled aluminum and glass, right? This Bang & Olufsen infotainment system for your home has this beautiful formed wood faceplate. You know, there's a little touch wheel in there to bring the volume up or down. It's great. It's beautiful. It's a work of art. The funny part is, on the back side of it, there's a touch screen. I mean, that's not even what they advertise. It's like, oh, by the way, it does come with a touch screen to operate the controls. Because screens really aren't luxurious anymore, right? Not to this buyer, right? There's a touch screen at every ATM. There's a touch screen at my gas pump. There's a touch screen everywhere. Not that impressive, right? So my first point is materials matter, all right? Now there's beautiful materials in vehicles, just about every vehicle, right? There's a Cadillac here, it's got ultra suede and real leather cut and sewn. It's got dark olive ash veneer, which is painfully expensive. It's got real carbon fiber and multiple finishes of aluminum. I mean, that's nice, right? The touch points, still all plastic for the user interface. If you want a really nice truck, Ford will sell you one of these F-150 Limiteds for well over $60,000, right? It's got furniture-grade leather. It's got cut and sewn instrument panel. It has this really cool wood that has kind of a burnishing, just like you'd see in a Gibson guitar. You know, beautiful stuff, expensive stuff. But all the touch points, still plastic. So, while we're talking about Ford, So let's look at Ford's lineup here for a second, right? It's an impressive lineup, right? A vehicle for everyone. I mean, we could be looking at a Toyota or Chevy product lineup, you know, not to pick on Ford, but you'd see the same thing, a vehicle for everybody. And while they're all Fords, each one of them has its own personality, and it kind of reflects the personalities of each buyer, right? I mean, each one of these vehicles has its own individual demographics, right? Age, gender, life stage, political views. I mean, this is a diverse enough portfolio where some of these owners probably really hate other owners for buying that car instead of my truck. All right, one size does not fit all. Not in sheet metal, not in powertrain, not even in color, right? How can one user interface emotionally connect with all these people? But that's what most of us are tasked to do. Let's talk about color here for a second while we're on the subject of color. Color is very personal. A lot of effort goes into creating new paints and new colors to capture the attention of buyers and allow them to express themselves as individuals, right? But imagine if we took these choices away, right? What color would you choose, right? Probably not orange. I love orange, but probably not the one you choose. It's probably gonna be silver or white or black, maybe not even black. Well, that sounds crazy to us, right? That's like we're going back to the Model T. That's really what we've done with UI. And the result is a lot of safe color work here. In fact, a lot of the same color work here, a sea of sameness. Now, I'll tell you, we didn't all infotainment designers around the world didn't all get together at, you know, designer night at the Paris Auto Show and say, let's agree on black, white, and blue. Like nothing else. But it kind of looks like we did. So that's a little tough. If infotainment is such a key brand attribute, why do they all look so similar? These color screens are kind of expensive. And when you buy the color screen, you get to use the whole wheel if you want. You're not just paying for blue and white. So it's time to really start exploring what is your brand about with color, right? Or allow people some choices within your brand. Okay, which brings me, to my next point. See, gesture does have a place. Beautiful. What we're talking about here today are some of the most expensive parts of the car, right? This is our chance to express something in a way that the rest of, I was gonna say the static car, but the car does move. But you know, the sheet metal doesn't change, the interior plastics don't change, or other materials. But this does, and it has a personality, and we really need to be able to explore that. There is so much going on in the world of graphic and UI design to pull from, right? Intense colors, mix of flat graphics and photography. You know, if you look at some of these compositions, beautiful, artful compositions, color blocking, text actually is part of the artwork, not just information, right? There's a hierarchy of information that kind of it conveys information, but you know, some of this stuff I just have it on my wall. That's fine. Flat graphics. I know that you know we as I'm going to get very design wonky on some of these points. You know, we move from these like highly skeuomorphic, you know, photorealistic, you know, cars and speakers to something very flat. There's something kind of in between where you can use sophisticated color and still have flat graphics arranged in an artful way and have something that's very fresh. You know, interactions can have a personality and be delightful instead of just, you know, I stab it and it lit up. And sometimes, you know, frankly, there doesn't have to be any logic at all. And this is just going to be a beautiful thing that you're going to have up, you know, for your peripheral vision while you're enjoying the driving experience. Okay, next subject. So when an infotainment program starts up, after, you know, the requisite observational research and all of that, the team has to decide what features to put in the system, right? The engineers have a mountain of possibilities in front of them, right? They go to every supplier, they go to every, you know, every tech supplier, they know too much. They'll ask marketing, you know, what does the customer want? And as I mentioned before, nobody's got a real good crystal ball on this. You know, the question's not what do customers want, it's what are customers going to want, 4 to 6 years from now in their car with infotainment. Nobody knows that, right? You get answers back like, well, they want Bluetooth connection or apps. Do you have any apps? Not really actionable input necessarily. So, the poor electrical team, they don't know what to do. What if they're wrong? What if they don't put in the thing that becomes the big thing that everybody uses? So you know what they do? It all goes in. And, there's a little bit of that going on here today too, where there are a lot of different things in these vehicles. And I think that if you really have a moment of honesty with yourself, you say, how much of this is an average person really going to use, right? I have known customers that have been in cars for 6 months before they pointed out, how do you like your heads-up display? My what? Out of adjustment? Didn't know it was there. So, I'm going to take this to our next rule, and this one is by far the most obvious, and also, frankly, the most difficult, right? Simple seems easy, but it's not. Simple is actually the hardest one on this list to achieve. But the good news is, for those of you who are really into metrics, simple you can measure, right? Are there 6 choices or are there 30? Did it take 5 steps or 15 steps to do a task? Or did the task happen automatically? Right? And this is really important for us. The Automotive Standard for UI is the most difficult in any industry, right? By far the most expensive, complex, dangerous product that somebody uses on a daily basis is what we're designing for, all right? You get a little training when you're 15, and then after that, anybody can throw you the keys, and you go. No seminar, no Genius Bar, you can't phone a friend. And if you open the owner's manual, that really is a failure on you, the customer's part, and our collective part, right? Nobody does that. So we actually have developed our own testing system that generates data for us when designing a new system, right? We have a database of current vehicles and the phone projection systems to make comparisons to, but the real value is not judging at the end, but to help make decisions along the way and trade-offs, to get too simple, which is hard to do. All right, NHTSA organizes interactions and distractions into these 3 categories. So that seemed like a really logical place for us to start. Visual is not just eyes off the road time, but how much is really staring back at you at any given time when you're trying to accomplish a task. Manual is hands off the wheel time and reach curves. Cognitive is how much thought goes in the task, right? Are you relying on muscle memory? Or do you have to take your mind off the road when you're doing something? And each category has measurable data, which is great. And this is basically how we do our testing. The last one, cognitive, really comes down to number of steps per task, right? And what's great about this is, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, has guidelines. They're based on, cars from the 50s with, 2 knobs and some favorites in between. But still, the basics are there. You can only look away from the road for 2 seconds at a time, 6 times, right? Pretty simple rule. Even I can remember that. I went to art school. And we can do a pass-fail on tasks. And it's amazing how many tasks, after owning the car for a while, or at least in our tests where, we try it maybe 5 times in a row, we can't get there. And so it's interesting. And so we have obviously we have a pass-fail for that as well. Here's the basic tasks that we measure, right? Which tasks are the most common? I don't know. True data doesn't exist. We've looked, but that's okay. As is customary for designers, when we don't have actual data, we make up our own. It's the 33% rule, right? Love it. Okay, so here's an example of, let's say, audio tasks, right? Choosing a favorite. Awesome. Favorites are the best, right? They've been in cars since the very beginning. I now see favorites, easy access to your favorites, kind of creeping into personal electronics. That's great. A little late, but that was something where we were ahead of them, which is fantastic. Some brands hide favorites. Some brands make it so that you can only look at some favorites depending on what screen you're on. We penalize them for that. So we didn't spend a lot of time on CD players and things like that, because hopefully that's not going to be used that much. We also look at whether or not physical controls, knobs, or buttons allow for shortcuts so you don't have to spend too much time with the screen. So here's a very light look at what is a lot of data. And we've used a format that I think anybody at a big company is very familiar with. Green means you're the best or among the best. Yellow means and red is we may have a problem here. And you can see on some of these things, well, obviously CarPlay and Edge don't necessarily rely on physical buttons or physical button size and font, but it is important. And we can see that there are some trade-offs being made here, right? Like FCA has fewer physical buttons. It allowed them to have bigger buttons with bigger font type. That's awesome. It also shows, though, when you get to, we don't measure screen size because, you know, they've got a bigger screen than, let's say, everyone but BMW on the list here. But it's screen density. I mean, the good news is it's a bigger screen. The bad news is it got packed with more stuff. And maybe it's really important that I tag a song, or maybe nobody uses that, or don't use it that much. But there are a lot of things staring back at you that you don't always need. So we kind of, we penalize them for that. That's the, you know, we see that a lot where companies go to larger and larger screens, and the temptation to now have everything in there, place it all on the screen is very high. Or saying, you know what, we're gonna have a minimum size for a button or a font, and you have a ton of that button and font all staring back at you without a hierarchy. That can be really difficult to use while you're driving. Okay, next one. The cognitive results, how many steps does it take to do some of these tasks? You know, I won't go through all the tasks or the exact numbers here, but I will say that, you know, when it comes to audio, we do pretty well as an industry. You know, we're absolutely on par with the phone projection guys, which is great. I mean, those are some of the hardest ones to test against. When we get into navigation and voice rec, not so much. I think a lot of cars now have a Siri pass-through as opposed to their own voice rec, and I would imagine most customers probably just use the Siri pass-through. Okay. We can also see where new technology can earn its way in, maybe reducing some of these steps, right? Pairing a phone is still a bit of a process, right? On most of these vehicles, I bet it probably is something that's locked out and you have to do while you're parked, which is logical. That's fine. It makes sense. Switching Bluetooth sources on a lot of these vehicles is not locked out, but gets dubiously close to NHTSA's guidelines and cutoff of how much distraction you should be doing. And, you know, given the way people really listen to music, you know, let's say people younger than me, they do like to share their music and they do like to guest DJ. So we tap a phone to pay. We tap a phone to pair to speakers and headphones. I mean, you can tap your phone to pair to a printer. I mean, a printer. Printers are ahead of us. You know, we all hate printers, don't we? So, is near-field communication worth putting in the car? Some OEMs say yes, some say no, but it does reduce those steps to one. And I mean, if you think about it, if you were really considering how people would use this in the car, like I said, having a guest DJ, maybe you put the tap to pair in the center console so that, you know, anybody in the car can be guest DJ with, you know, obviously an accept or a no from the driver, because there's also those kind of people too. All right. So I mentioned a little bit about information density as part of our evaluation. Now, a lot of today's infotainment systems are kind of crowded into a single zone, and I'm not picking on GMC here, but I'm going to use their picture as an example. Where for most vehicles, that means the center stack. That's the buttons, that's the screen, that's the interactions. And it ends up reminding me a little bit of what infotainment was like way back even before my day, or maybe when I was younger, where you had 3 channels. And there weren't enough choices for everyone to disagree on what to watch. So, I mean, everybody had the same experience. But the car is different. The driver's workload is different than, say, what the passengers are up to. And families, the family room is kind of different. Like in a lot of cases, TV's not even on, and everybody has their own tailored experience. And whereas that's kind of nice for a family, when they're at home, given all the choices and the different levels of responsibility while you're driving, that becomes really important in the car. And I think that it's a very interesting prospect for all of us, for the car to kind of catch up to how people are using technology elsewhere. I'm not saying that the answer is put a screen everywhere. In fact, in a lot of ways, that's not the case. But I will say that this next point is very important, that this needs to be immersive. And I think that there are a lot of technology providers here today that have shown a lot of concepts that created a more immersive experience, right? Visual is not always the best way to convey information, right? The sounds you hear in a car and where they're coming from are absolutely controllable. The haptic feedback is not just what's happening on the screen, it can be anywhere. Okay. I think that the line between interior designer and interaction designer is starting to blur. And I think that most of the winners here today won because that blurring has existed. Because traditionally, you have interior designers that want the cleanest, most beautiful, perfect kitchen with the nicest materials and all of that. And then the infotainment guys show up and say, okay, I got all this stuff. Where should we put it? And integrating that in the best safe way is a very thoughtful process. You almost need to start with that. Otherwise, if I'm going to extend my kitchen metaphor, you end up with the junk drawer, right? Well, it's in the screen. Put it in the screen. And 17 pages of depth in the screen later, you can maybe find what you have if you survive the interaction. Okay. Technology now allows, for information and interactions to be almost anywhere in the car, right? And I think that the best interactions are the ones that actually don't take a lot of time and effort for the driver. So organizing information into the proper space is an art form now. And if you're just thinking, well, I've got a cluster and I've got a screen in the center and everything goes in there, you are going to get left behind by your competitors. Okay. All right, for my next point, I'm going to take us back to 2010, which was an amazing time. And I think for a lot of us, by amazing, I mean actually pretty awful. We were just, a lot of the companies were coming out of bankruptcies and things like that. I remember being at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas with my electrical engineering colleagues from GM. And we had an emergency meeting in one of the execs' hotel rooms after watching Ford's very impressive keynote speech, where Alan Mulally and his team rolled out Sync Gen 2 with My Ford Touch. We went through the 5 stages of grief, all right? There were guys breathing into paper bags. I mean, to this day, red sweater vests make me very uneasy. It's like we just saw a Sputnik launch and we were flat-footed, all right? That really kicked off a lot of us. And between about 2010 and 2012, there was a flurry of activity in getting these things out to market. And then, crickets. So here's a question. If you walk into most dealerships today, what is often the oldest thing in the showroom, right? In too many cases, it's the infotainment system. Right? If you think about that, there are a lot of infotainment systems out there that are older than the sheet metal, that are older than the interior design. Ford was the pioneer here, right? The Sync Gen 2 system was designed in 2007, right? There wasn't even an iPhone yet. But they're on iPhone 7, right? And Ford's just rolling out Sync Gen 3. And they're still ahead of a lot of the folks on the board here for redoing the system. That's a long time in the market without a facelift, all right? I'll remind everybody that, like, as an industry, we invented the facelift, right? The automotive world is king at this. In fact, I look at, Apple's planned obsolescence, and where do you think they got that from? So it looks like we're on about a 6-year average for the appearance of a UI. And that brings me to my fifth element of success here, which is young. And I'm not necessarily being ageist here, but these things don't celebrate birthdays very well. And if you want to do something really creative, and you want to do something innovative, and you want to really wow people, if you know that it's going to have to be in the market that long, you might go a different way. All right? When it comes to UI, we're a lot like reptilian parents, right? We lay the eggs and we walk off. Good luck with that. I'm going to go do something else. It's not that nothing isn't done, but, features are added, or, the system speed might be a little bit better. And that's great, but does anybody really notice, right? Appearance matters, right? That compelling feeling of newness when you open the door has a lot to do with how the screens look. Maybe as much or more than does it have the new widget that my dealer didn't explain to me, right? These customers don't always understand the technology. They don't always understand the features, whether they have it or even how it works. But they all have eyes, and they all see it. All right? So, if you look at it one way, right? Sheet metal, if done right, can have a timeless appeal. I would love to drive any one of these pickups or Mustangs, for sure. But anything but the latest technology, no thank you. And I think a lot of people feel that way. This stuff has a half-life of 5 weeks. So somewhere in that life cycle management planning that I think that everybody in the room here touches in some way, there probably ought to be a plan to make sure there's a facelift, that these things look new, that they are fresh, and that they convey that your brand is cutting edge. I think there's a lot of focus on the new feature or the new widget, but the fact is this is at least as important. Okay, so if you think of it this way, you launch a system, and you get to take all the information that you've collected about feature use, dealer feedback, consumer research, everything else, and have a do-over, right? Without re-architecting the entire electrical system, which is major surgery. I get why these things are in the market for 6 or more years. But you can improve the sizes and scales of text and touch point by making room with the space you saved, by getting rid of the stuff that it turns out nobody used, right? Here's what Sync Gen 2 maybe could have looked like in 2013, right? A little more color, a little more drama. The basic form behavior is the same, but it's a facelift. It looks new. Who doesn't like a do-over? Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of a case study here that is an interesting thing that we've been able to observe as we work with clients around the world. Now, you would think that Japan's, let's say, proficiency in electronic technology means that they would absolutely be automotive infotainment leaders, leave everybody behind, right? And I hope I'm not really offending anybody with this, but that's not really the case. Right, and I think that if you look at the consumer reports, it tells a pretty painful story. Now, if you dig a little bit deeper, it turns out they actually are, just not in the way that you think. See, there's a potential answer for marrying, let's say, the expectations for consumer electronics and the car life cycle in the Japanese domestic market, okay? When you buy a new car in Japan, it's pretty common to skip the infotainment checkboxes altogether and drive your vehicle off the showroom without one. And you take it right over to one of these big box auto parts stores, superstores like Autobox. I love how they spell that. There you can choose from several brand new, state-of-the-art infotainment systems and update anytime you want. You want a new radio every year? No problem. The OEMs share their surface data with the tier 1 electronic suppliers, so it drops right in, integrates beautifully. right? It's waiting there, maybe even before the car is launched. You know, you want voice rec back in 1997? They had it. You want DVD navigation with real-time traffic back in 2001? No problem. You want to play an iPod through your audio system back in 2002? I mean, the iPod came out in 2001. That's probably faster than any of us here thought possible. You know, do you want Pandora before anyone else? You want CarPlay 2 years ago? Do you want to buy Laser HUD right now? They're all in the Japanese domestic market, and they didn't come from any of the OEMs. All right, there's a very clear demarcation in that market between the OEMs and the tier 1 suppliers. They play to their strengths. The OEM, they bend sheet metal, they tune chassis, they do powertrains, they do batteries, they do safety systems. This is all very hard stuff, but they've got decades of experience doing this. And they allow their electronics partners to experiment, try things, kind of at their own risk, right? To be able to find out which idea is going to be the best, right? It's hyper competitive, but it's a very interesting market. And the winner here is kind of the Japanese customer, right? They get the choice they want. They get to update as often as they want, and maybe they appreciate their car more for it. So, you know, I guess in general, I do love seeing the best idea win in a competition. You know, go little guy. So I'd like to thank Tom and Drew and the team at Wards for the opportunity to speak here at this conference and just having the conference all together. I think this is a great opportunity, and you know, congratulations really to all the winners here. There is an unbelievable effort in putting these cars together, and I think that everyone here should be really proud for the winners. Thanks.